Hi class, welcome to lesson number 36, okay? So we're trying to build the macroeconomic principles and concepts so that we understand, well, okay, we can explain the economy using a graph, using aggregate demand and aggregate supply, but not only that, but say we're in a recession, how can we fix that using fiscal policy? And a little later on, we're gonna learn more about monetary policy, okay? So we've learned about, if we're in a recession, how do we fix that using a fiscal policy? If we're in an inflationary period, how do we use fiscal policy to fix that as well? Okay, and in the last class, we talked a little bit about the issue of crowding out effect, which also happened to be your homework question. So the point was that government is spending more money, right? G goes up, right? The point is to make sure that the 80 shifts to the right so that our GDP goes up and output goes up, you have more employed people, and you can get out of a recession that way. Okay, that sounds good, but how does the government make money, or get the money rather, to spend it? So we said, well, the government goes to the market of loanable funds, right? Right here, the market of loanable funds. What the government does in a sense is it says, okay, well, you know what, banks and public, we need some money because we want to spend it, because that's spending money gets multiplied. Remember in the last class, or two classes before, we talked about the multiplier effect and how if government spends X amount of money, it actually multiplies by 1 over 1 minus MPC, okay? So, all right, so the government says, okay, we go to this market for loanable funds and we go ahead and want to loan out amount of money. The problem is when they loan out this amount of money, the supply kind of goes down, right? So say there's $100 in this market for loanable funds. The government says we need $20 to spend money, okay? So it's going to go down, obviously, to 80, okay? And this shift comes by showing a supply shift to the left, okay? The supply parallel shift to the left, again, double arrows, right? You understand two things. Now, the market for loanable funds has interest rates on the y-axis and loanable funds on the x-axis. And then when the supply shifts to the left, your interest rates actually go up, right? Because if you have less of something, it becomes more valuable, right? So interest rates go up, right? And your quantity goes down. What's the problem with this? It's because if the interest rates go up, it's more expensive for you and me to borrow, okay? And what that does is that it decreases the consumption. Also, the firms can't invest as much because it's expensive for them to borrow. So the investment goes down and AD actually goes down. So this was something we talked about as a crowding out effect, because in essence, the government is crowding out the consumer, me and you, and the firms, okay? So that was the homework question. Now something that leads directly on, okay, so that was the old stuff, and now we're going on to the new stuff. Something that goes directly to this, from this crowding out effect to the next topic is something called as net export effect, okay? So after I erase this, so imagine, right? So the government says, we've established this so far. We said that if the government has to borrow money from the market of loanable funds, they decrease the supply and the interest rates go up. The interest rates go up. And the market for, so the government spending goes up, market for loanable funds goes down, okay? So we talked about this like 3 or 4 times already, right? So we've established this and we said what happens when that happens? Well, we said that the interest rates go up because we have less of this loanable funds, and so it becomes more valuable, and that translates to higher interest rates. All right, that sounds good. So what happens after this? There's another story. What tends to happen, okay, and this, by the way, is called the net export effect. Net export effect, right? So interest rates go up. Okay, so what generally happens in the world is this is how investments work, okay? So I'm in Australia, okay, and the government in the United States has increased its spending, okay? It's taken out money from this market for loanable funds, and in essence what it's done is it's increased its interest rates because they've decreased the market for loanable funds, it's become more expensive, so US interest rates have gone up, okay? So what me as an Australian is thinking, I'm thinking, the interest rates in America have gone up. And so what that means is when I put in money, okay, I get more money back, okay? So what this does is this attracts foreign investors. So the amount of foreign investors that come into this particular economy, let's say this is the United States, okay, it could be anything, okay? So the foreign investors rush in to this economy. Investors. Good, I'm glad I can finish that word. So the foreign investors go up, okay? Because they realize that higher interest rates mean higher rate of return for them, Okay, so I'm going to say that one more time. A higher interest rate means that they can get more money on their bank account in the US than they can in Australia. Okay, obviously this is relative, you got to compare it. There's an example, but let's say for argument's sake that the Australian interest rate is lower than the US interest rate because the US interest rates have just gone up. Why? Because the government spending has gone up. Government spending has gone up and it's made the loanable funds come down. Loanable funds have come down, interest rates go up. Interest rates go up, they become more attractive for foreign investors. I hope everyone got that link. Okay, I'm going to go over it one more time a little later just to clarify, but hopefully everyone understands that higher rate of return if the interest rates go up. So foreign investors have come in. So if foreign investors have come in, here's what happens. Graphically speaking, we're gonna talk about how this affects the dollar. Okay, so let's talk about the Australian. Okay, and I'm saying this is the Australian dollar. Okay, well I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it's Australian dollar, but this is the Australian price of a US dollar. Okay, of a dollar, the US dollar. And this is the amount of US dollars. Okay? As usual, there's a demand for dollars. Okay? And there's a supply of dollars. Okay? Now, what's going to happen is as these interest rates go up, the demand for, when the foreign investors go up, that means that the demand for the US dollar has gone up. So this demand, in effect, has a parallel shift and it goes to the right, to D1, okay, to D1. Now watch what has happened is that the Australian price of a dollar has actually gone up. And the quantity of dollars, of course, have increased in the market. The point is, because of the idea that foreign investors have rushed into the US, okay, it's made the dollar more attractive and it's made the dollar actually more valuable, okay? What does that mean? It means that when the dollar becomes a stronger dollar than it was before, because of the fact that these foreign investors are coming in, relatively speaking, countries' purchasing powers in the world have decreased when compared to the US. I'm going to say that one more time. Let's say Australia, before all of this, okay, but let's say Australia before all of this, was buying software services from the US, okay? And they were buying software services from the US for $100 million a year, okay? And they were spending $100 million, okay? They're converting money. Now, after this has happened, after the interest rates have gone up and the foreign investors have jumped in, okay, that $100 million, okay, that services that was worth $100 million is all of a sudden worth $125 million because the Australian dollar is weaker and the US dollar is stronger, okay? The US dollar is stronger. So what this has done is when foreign investors go up, the number of foreign investors in America go up, okay, or any economy that has its higher interest rate. So it could be Bhutan for all that matters. If Bhutan's interest rates are going up, the amount of foreign investors in Bhutan are going to increase, okay, and that's going to make the following happen. So in this case, we've said let's stick to the U.S. dollar for argument's sake. We said that the U.S. government has increased its spending. We said that the market for loanable funds has decreased. We've said that as that result, the interest rates have increased, and because of that, foreign investors have increased, and then the U.S. dollar has become stronger. Okay, I hope everyone has gotten this graph. I'm gonna erase it, and I'm gonna draw the rest of the connecting link. Okay, so let's continue with that. We have agreed that the foreign investors have gone up, and now I've showed you guys graphically how the U.S. dollar is how the U.S. dollar is stronger. So the U.S. dollar is stronger, right? The worth of the U.S. dollar is now stronger because of the foreign investors coming in, because the demand for the U.S. dollar has gone up. Okay, so if this happens, if the U.S. dollar is stronger, what tends to happen is the countries like Australia or Canada can't buy as much of the American goods anymore because they're more expensive than before because the dollar is stronger. Okay, the dollar is weaker. Canada and Australia can buy more of our goods because they can afford more. Okay, this whole concept is to do with purchasing power. Okay, so when the U.S. dollar increases, the purchasing power of the countries, of our foreign countries that buy our goods, okay, has decreased. Okay, so when the purchasing power of other countries decrease, what tends to happen is our exports decrease. Does that make sense? Because people can't afford as much or as many of our goods anymore because our dollar is stronger and they need to pay more than before for the same amount of goods that they demand. Okay? And because of this, right, if exports go down, guys, remember, if C or I or G or X minus M, X for imports, X for exports, excuse me, M for imports, okay? If any of these go up, holding AS constant, aggregate supply constant, AD goes up, right? AD goes up. But if any of these go down, which in this case, exports are going down, right? Exports are going down, net exports are going down, AD actually goes down. Okay, so remember the end result. AD is going down. But remember, the point of increasing government spending in the first place was to have an expansionary fiscal policy, which is meant to get us out of a recession. Okay, what they're trying to do when they increase this government spending, when they borrow this amount from the loanable funds and they're trying to increase the government spending, what they're trying to do is they're trying to increase the 80. Okay, their goal is to increase the 80 so they can shift the economy out of a recession. But look at the end result, right? And obviously, this effect is bigger at the end of the day than this effect. But keep in mind that this happens as well. The 80 also goes down. When we're actually trying to increase the 80, 80 actually goes down as well. So one needs to be careful of how the US dollar is working in the international markets. Okay? And the government has to make sure that this is in check as well. These are one of the few things that we can talk about that when you say we have to increase the government spending, it's not just clear cut the fact that 80 just shifts to the right. There are some variables that depending on how things work, we can tell what's the magnitude of the change. So if you're watching this and you're making sure the US dollar is not becoming stronger, you can kind of control this effect. Okay? And if the US dollar is becoming really strong, obviously this effect is going to be much bigger. And that effort of increasing the government spending might be a waste. Okay? Normally speaking, though, this is a much bigger effect than this. But this whole net export effect has been taught to you guys just to make sure that you have an idea that there are other consequences when you increase government spending rather than just increasing AD. Okay, so that's something that is important. That being said, let's talk about a concept called automatic stabilizers. Okay, automatic stabilizers. Automatic stabilizers are pretty cool, actually, because we have figured out a couple things, right? We said that when we're in a recession, right? When we're in a recession, we want to make sure that there's deficit spending. Okay, we want to make sure that there's deficit spending. And during a time when there's inflation, we want to control spending, right? We want to control spending. So automatic stabilizers are defined as the following. So automatic stabilizers right, are defined as any mechanism designed, let me get the definition out of the way, guys, so we can explain this. Designed so that it increases a deficit during spending, during a recession, right? And the second part to automatic stabilizers is that it increases a budget surplus, which for those of you that remember, a budget surplus happens when there's the tax revenue is greater than the government spending, right? It increases the budget surplus during an inflationary, I can't say the word inflationary anymore because it's so tough, right? Increasing a budget surplus during inflationary times. Inflationary times. Okay, what does this mean? All right, it means that we've kind of figured out a couple of things, okay? We've said that when we're in a recession, how do we fix it? Well, we said that the government has to spend money, okay? That's how they get out of a recession. So if the government spends money, how do they do that? They borrow money, right? And that is called deficit spending. When you borrow money to spend, that's called deficit spending, okay? So if you can design somehow automatically a system where you can increase the deficit spending, right, during a recession, right, and at the same time you increase the budget surplus during inflationary times, because when you increase taxes, you can control inflation that way, then you have a pretty good system, right? Because you're automatically trying to control the business cycle, okay? So this is a great thing. So how are these systems available in the real world? Well, they come in form of tax systems, okay? Tax systems. And we talked about a progressive tax before, guys. We talked about a progressive tax. A progressive tax, for those of you who remember from microeconomics, is a tax that as your income increases, right? As your income increases, so does the tax, right? And we have this thing called the tax bracket in the United States, right? If you're making between 0 to 50,000, you have this much amount of tax. 50 to 100,000, a little more. 100 to 200, a lot more, right? You get the point. As your income increases, your tax increases, right? So a progressive tax system, in a way, is designed, I don't want to X there, I want to check there. So if a progressive tax system is designed actually to be an automatic stabilizer. Why? Because when you have a deficit and there's a recession, right, people are not making as much money. So they're not being taxed as much. But in a time of inflationary periods, when people are making a lot of money, you're being taxed a lot. So this system, right, ensures that taxes are high during inflationary times and taxes are low during a recessionary times, helping our cause. Now, do automatic stabilizers fix business cycles? Absolutely not. We would have not had the 2008 meltdown if automatic stabilizers fixed everything. They don't. What they do is they kind of soften the business cycle, right? So they make sure that we don't have business cycles that look like this, but rather something a little tinier, so we have more of a consistent business cycle, okay? So automatic stabilizers are something that you want to know in case it shows up on a test, but the point is that they are designed to soften and kind of help you kind of control the business cycle and make us a little more consistent for our economy, okay? So that is automatic stabilizers for you. The next thing we're going to talk about is this lovely thing that we talked about a little before called the Production Possibilities Frontier. Now, what is a PPF for those of you that remember? Okay, a PPF is a way to graph a combination between two particular goods. So let's say you have two goods, okay? I have the iPod. Okay, so it's if someone's birthday, you know, and you're thinking, how many iPods can I buy with a particular amount of money, or how many, let's say, Apple stocks you can buy instead. Okay, so I know they're kind of two different things, right? But they're a way of investing money. You can either buy an Apple stock for yourself, okay, and a stock is basically an ownership in a company. Again, we're going to define that later formally. But this is an Apple iPod, right? And this is a Production Possibilities Frontier that kind of looks like that, right? So at this point, I have more amount of Apple stock and less amount of Apple iPod. And at this point, I have a lot more Apple iPods and less of Apple stock, okay? And this is what we call as a Production Possibilities Frontier, okay? Now, we talked about this a little bit before, but there are a couple ways to shifting a PPF, okay? One of them, make sure I have everything, is the technology within a country. Technology. If the technology is better, we can make iPods for a lot less. And, well, stock is not really a good example as such, so let me change it for a durable good, right? Let me make it, this is a kind of a different thing, but let's say cars, okay? Let's say cars, because, you know, technologically, if you're doing better and you're Ford and you're making cars for cheaper, you can make more cars. And if better technology in the long run increases the PPF and it shifts it outward, okay, shifts it outward. Okay, what's the other thing? It's the quantity of resources. Quantity of resources. What does that mean? Well, let's say I'm Ford Motor Company, I make cars, okay? Or let's say I'm Apple, right? I make iPods, okay? There are some materials that you need to make both of these things, right? For cars, you need steel, you need aluminum, okay? So if I need to make aluminum to make cars, and the quantity of resources in the United States, of the amount of aluminum has skyrocketed, right? And so if there's a lot of something, obviously it's cheaper than before. We talked about this concept using a simple microeconomic graph. This basically means that the quantity of resources, the more amount of resources, the more we can shift the PPF out. Okay, so if the quantity of resources is below, then we shift the PPF to the left. Okay, so if quantity of resources decreases, PPF goes down. Quantity of resources increases, it goes up. You get the point. Lastly is the quality of resources. What do we mean by the quality of resources? And let me make sure I have it right as well. Yeah, quality of resources. So let's say I am Ford Motor Company and I make cars, right? And I have, let's say, about 20,000 employees in a factory, okay? And we make all sorts of cars. You've got small cars, medium cars, large cars, okay? And let's say that my labor force is all of a sudden they receive a training in how to design and how to handle more complicated machines, and these machines can actually control our costs. So if I have a more educated, a higher quality labor force, I can actually produce more for a lot less. Okay, and again, my PPF shifts to the right. Okay, if my quality is down, my labor force cannot handle this, and it goes down. My PPF shifts to the left. This is basic review, but the point behind this idea is talking about productivity. No matter what you talk about quantity, quality, or technology, you're talking about productivity, okay? And today we're going to talk about the factors that drive productivity, okay? Productivity is driven by a couple different ideas, okay? Let's talk about a couple different things, but I think one of the first things that we talked about was technology. Okay? Technology is really important because what it does is it makes our resources, we can be a lot more efficient and we can control our costs. So having better technology at all times is really, really helpful to no matter what economy you're in. Okay? So let's talk about productivity. And the first thing we said is let's talk about technology. Okay? And this is about, we're talking on a macroeconomic scale. So we're talking about an entire economy, okay? So technology. Let's give an example for technology, okay? So before, when we had, you can take any country and let's look at countries that have developed in the past 10 years really well. Let's talk about China, right, as an economy, or China and India, okay? Both economies have been increasing at a GDP rate of between, I believe, 7 to 10%. Extremely high, okay? Comparatively, developed countries are much lower than that, okay? So these two economies have been improving by a lot. Their GDP growth rate is extremely healthy. How is this happening? Because both the countries are employing better technology, okay? How does that happen? Let's say that both China and India before used to construct roads for their public. Okay? They made roads before, but before they did not have as many machines. So what they used to construct is about 10 roads a month. Let's just say 10 highways a month. Okay? But with better improving technology, right, and with machines that are much more complicated and are up to par with the global world, right, they can produce 100 times that, right? 100 times that. Okay? So they can produce 1,000 highways a month. Okay? What this does is this dramatically increases your network, your infrastructure, so that other factories can come in, other people can move their goods faster, right? And all of a sudden, their economy actually bumps up, okay, by an exponential amount. This is an example that I just pulled out of the fly, but what I'm trying to say is that technology is a really good indication of how the country is doing. The better the technology, okay, the better the productivity, all right, and the better the economy is doing. technology is extremely important, okay? Secondly, we want to talk about natural resources. Natural resources come in two different ways. One is renewable. What is renewable? A lot of things can be renewable. We can talk about how people can, well, hydrogen is renewable, but that's not exactly a resource that you want to talk about because, well, making hydrogen, different process. But let's talk about something like an idea that people talk about is for wood, right? People harvest plants, and that can be actually a renewable resource. Now, if you're not harvesting as many trees and you're taking out more, that leads to deforestation, all sorts of issues. The other one is a non-renewable, which is pretty much what you think about when you think about most natural resources. Non-renewable are like things like oil, fossil fuels, right? That basically when you're digging these out, there's only a finite amount, so it doesn't get replenished, okay? So natural resources are really important because if you're a country that's gifted with the natural resources, let's talk about oil, let's talk about the Middle East. A lot of growth in today's world is from the Middle East, right? Take a country like Qatar, has one of the highest GDP per capita in the world, okay? Qatar basically is very gifted in non-renewable natural resources, okay? Extremely high in natural gas as well, okay? So this gives this country a higher productivity level because the natural gases, right? The natural resources give Qatar a higher productivity level because they give them more money. That money gets pumped into different things, and that gives you a better productivity. So natural resources are extremely important in talking about productivity of a country, because if you don't have those natural resources, it can be a trouble for you to grow in a bigger way, right? Because a lot of things, if you want industry-wise, you need energy, right? And if you don't have energy, like from fossil fuels, you can't grow, okay? So that can be hindering to your growth plan. So productivity is definitely increased when you have natural resources. The other one we talk about is, apart from natural resources, is human resources, right? Also known as human capital. Okay? So how is your labor force, right? How is your labor force doing? Are they educated? Are they always diseased? Are they having a lot of problems, right? Are they young? Are they old, right? All these things really depend. Let's say you have a really young, okay, educated human capital, okay? What can you do? Obviously, you're going to be extremely productive, right? Because they have the ability, the labor force has the ability to pick up and grow any industry, okay? Any industry, and that's a valuable asset. But let's say you have an old set of labor force, okay? That, you know, and obviously when you're old, you have more diseases, okay? So they're not as productive, right? Pretty simple stuff, okay? So your human capital is something you need to watch out for, and that's something that governments need to pay attention for because it directly affects your productivity. The last one we're going to talk about, okay, is the physical capital. Okay, physical capital. This is just talking about things like machines, right? So let's, we talked about, let's talk about a country like China or India or any other country. Let's talk about developing countries, right? If you take a developing country, right? I'm just going to pick on a random country. Let's pick Bangladesh, okay? And Bangladesh has, let's say, older physical capital than the rest of the world, okay? This is going to be a problem because when you want to do projects, okay, in a big scale, you're going to take a lot more time. You're not as productive, okay? You're not as productive, okay? But imagine the same project, okay, is being done in the United States. You have better physical capital, you have better machines, okay? So that project doesn't take 10 years, but it takes 6 months, okay? That is a difference, and that's what productivity does. More productive you are, the better your economy is, for obvious reasons, okay? So these 4 reasons are important because when you think about productivity, when you think about economy, you can think about the factors that affect it, namely physical capital, human capital, natural resources, and technology, okay? That being said, let me just review real quick about what we went over. We went over automatic stabilizers. We went over productivity, right? We did a little bit of a refresher on PPF. We talked about the net export effect, which was extremely important. Okay, so in my opinion, net export effect is a pretty cool concept and also pretty important. But I think I want you guys. Yeah, you know what? We should talk about the net export effect for the homework question. So let's assign. I'm going to assign the homework question as being the graph for explaining me net export effect. In fact, if you can do it without the graph, that's fine as well. As long as you can explain me the phenomenon about the net export effect, that'd be fantastic. So I want to see you guys in the next class with the answer to the net export effect, and explain to me the net export effect, how that works. For the next classes, we'll work on the monetary policy and how governments can improve recessions or work against inflation using monetary policy. Thank you so much for joining me.